A History of Cycling Through Rebirth. After I had related the results of my practice, pati, to Luang Por, we began to talk about the past, about the history of cycling through birth and death in various existences. Luang Por asked, "In regards to the place in which you attained enlightenment, did you contemplate how you and that place were associated?" "With permission, Luang Por. I had been a dog there before. I had died there in the past." Luang Por laughed and said, "There has to be an associated rebirth, because in cycling through rebirths in this world for such a long time, we have been born as every type of sentient being." I turned the question back to Luang Por. "With permission, Luang Por, what was your link to Long Kot?" Luang Por replied, "I was formerly a muntjac that lived in that area. I grew old and died naturally." Luang Por only asked this question in order to test whether I would know about my past rebirths. Luang Por started on a new topic, asking me which perfection of character, barami, I cultivated that served as my main foundation, and since when and in what era I had begun cultivating it. After Luang Por asked this question about such a deep topic, I related to him what I knew. "With permission, Luang Por, in a previous era, a long time ago, I had developed truthfulness, such that whatever I did so earnestly. If I was determined to do something, I had to carry it out according to that determination. I trained myself to be one who was true at all times. If I was determined to do something that didn't violate the code of moral conduct, sila Dhamma, I had to do it according to that determination. I vowed to myself that I would be a truthful person. If I were to say anything about any matter to anyone, I would train myself to be a person who speaks the truth in every matter. I was truthful with myself and truthful with others as well. I was honest with myself and honest with others as well. I didn't fool myself and I didn't fool others. I didn't speak to incite and I didn't speak falsehoods to anyone. Whatever the truth was, that was what I would say. Thus, it was the cultivation of the perfection of truthfulness, satya barami, that took first place. The cultivation of the perfection of wisdom, paññā barami, was second. The method, ubaya, of developing the perfection of wisdom was to train my discernment and train myself to observe various situations and contemplate, analyze, judge, and ponder them in a rational manner. If this is the cause, what will be the result? If this is the result, what was the cause? What was a wrong cause, a right cause, a wrong result, or a right result? I used reason as the basis for making decisive judgments. The important thing is not to side with yourself. Once you have a problem, you must think and fix your own problem. Once someone else has a problem, you must think and help them fix the problem. This is how the perfection of wisdom is developed in a worldly way. As for the basis of cultivating the perfection of wisdom in a Dhamma way, the three common characteristics, talakana, of impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and not self, anatta, must be used as elements in the cultivation of wisdom. With permission, Luang Por, I continuously developed these two perfections as my core principles until they became a part of my mindset. When I was born into this lifetime, I was conscious that I was someone who possessed truthfulness, satya. I was conscious that I possessed great integrity, satya, in what I did and what I said. As a child and as a teen, I was conscious that I was unlike others. I didn't like those who didn't possess integrity, and I didn't like those who told falsehoods. Deep in my mind, this is how I felt. Now for the question about the era in which I cultivated these perfections. With permission, Luang Por, there was a time in which I was reborn during the Sikhi Buddha's dispensation. During that era, the monks had appointed me the Aramikavata, or one who attends to monks and novices, samanera, and takes care of lodging, senasana, within the temple. I ministered to a great number of arahants. I treated every single monk and samanera with respect because I admired and had faith, sattha, in them. I was deferential, gracious, and humble toward all monks and samaneras. There were no fewer than 500 monks and samaneras in that temple. My daily responsibilities were boiling water for the monks and samaneras to drink, boiling water for the great elder monks, mahatera, to use in bathing, taking hot water and food to elder monks at their huts, kuti, wholeheartedly attending to monks and samaneras that were sick, looking after the cleanliness, sweeping and cleaning the elder monks' kutis, cleaning the pavilion, and cleaning within the temple grounds with attentive industriousness. I trained myself to always be on time. Whenever I was doing anything, I would be determined to do it successfully. I was determined to lessen the burden on the monks and samaneras so that they could be happy. I was obedient and compliant. I would not make the monks and samaneras within the temple worry. At that time, I was very exhausted, but I endured. I had vowed, Satya, to myself that I will minister to the monks and samaneras in this manner forever. Even if this exhaustion claims my life, may I honor the Sikhi Buddha, honor the Dhamma, and honor all of the monks and samaneras. May the resolve, adhitthana, of this verbal promise, Satya Vacha, serve as the mindset and aiding condition, Paccaya, that leads to my clearly knowing and truly seeing the Buddha's true doctrine, Sattama, in the future. As for the perfection of wisdom, Panya Barami, I trained myself to be one who is thoroughly rational at all times. The other perfections of character, Barami, were byproducts that came in tow. I desired to attain release and achieve enlightenment, Nibbana, starting from that era onward. The perfection of truth, Satya Barami, and the perfection of wisdom, Panya Barami, were my prominent traits. I trained myself to have this mindset. If I was determined, it wasn't impossible, and I could do it. Luang Por prodded me further. How did you cultivate wisdom in a Dhamma way? With permission, Luang Por, in order to cultivate the perfection of wisdom, Panya Barami, in a Dhamma way, I use the three common characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not-self as the basis in wisdom contemplations. Regardless of whether an object is governed by a life force, vijnana, or not governed by a life force, everything arises from the cause of mental formations, sankhara. Once it arises, it cannot remain constant. It inevitably changes and transforms, as is normal. It exists momentarily and then ceases, as is normal. Whether it ceases quickly or slowly depends on the causes and conditions, paccaya, within itself. This is how it is in the world. These are characteristics common to the elements, samanya lakkhana dhatu. Every single thing inevitably possesses the condition of arising according to causes and conditions, and must cease according to those causes. All suffering inevitably converges in the mind. There are many causes and conditions that cause suffering to arise within the mind. Suffering arises from internal causes, that is, ourselves, and suffering arises from many different external causes and conditions, such as extreme heat, extreme cold, or extreme hunger. When you want something external but do not get it according to your wishes, mental suffering can arise. If you do not want something that you dislike, but you end up getting it, you can experience mental suffering. Consequently, you experience pleasing preoccupations, aramana, at times, and displeasing preoccupations, aramana, at times. You are attached to external things and think that they should remain with you forever. You don't want to be separated from them. Once that thing does separate from you, your mind suffers. Suffering from internal causes stems from the body to which the mind is bound and occupies. The mind is delusional and thus wrongly perceives that this body belongs to me. Little does it know that the body contains the causes of the mind suffering within itself, such as aging or affliction from various maladies. This is because the body harbors clumps of diseases within itself. Another type of suffering, dukkha, is natural suffering, sabhava dukkha, or the innate suffering that exists in everybody that is born. It is the suffering of posture, iriyapata, as there exists no single posture in which you can remain happy forever. Initially, you say that standing is happiness, but after standing for a long time, suffering arises in the mind. You could say that walking is happiness, but after walking for a long time, suffering can arise in the mind. You could say that sitting is happiness, but after sitting for a long time, suffering can arise in the mind. You could say that sleeping is happiness, but after sleeping for a long time, suffering arises in the mind as well. Consequently, postures must constantly be changed in order to alleviate suffering. The postures are changed repeatedly, countless times. So long as the mind inhabits the body, it must continue to suffer like this until the day it dies. When the body is going to die, there is an even greater increase in suffering. It is the beginning of the disintegration of the elements, Tatu. During that period, there will be a lot of suffering, but there is no way to remedy it. Even if you fear death, you still have to die anyway. In regards to the method of developing wisdom of anatta, you must constantly contemplate that anatta is something that has ceased to exist. To say it is an animal, person, self, me, or you is invalid because it has all ceased to exist. To construct sumuti, a name for it, as this form or that form, is invalid. For instance, when the four elements, jatu tatu, earth, water, wind, and fire, come together as a kana, or a clump or group, and the mind, citta, and consciousness, vijnana, inhabit it, we call it a physical body, rupa. We can suppose, samuti, that it is me and mine. Whenever the citta leaves the body's work is done, even though the earth element and water element are still present in the dead body. Without the wind element and fire element, the body will disintegrate, rot, and decay. If you were to burn it, all that would remain would be bone fragments. You would be unable to continue to call those bones self, atta, any longer. Thus, it is called anatta, meaning something that has ceased to exist. Every living being in this world, without exception, is the same in this way. Whether it is something occupied by consciousness or not occupied by consciousness, everything inevitably ceases to exist. Every single thing reverts back to its original elements. This is called sapphe dhamma anattati, yatha panyaya pasati, atta nipindati tukhe, esa makko visuddhiya. Once one with strong wisdom contemplates according to reality in this way, and the mind, citta, knows and sees the truth, that all phenomena, sabhava, that arise as is normal, must cease as is normal. Nibbita, or dispassion about repetitive rebirth, inevitably arises in the mind, citta. Practicing thinking in this way on a frequent basis is referred to as the method for cultivating wisdom in a Dhamma way. After listening to my explanation, Luang Por immediately broke into a smile and said, "Gee, that's a very good method of training in wisdom contemplations." After I finished relating my cultivation of barami to Luang Por, I wanted to know how Luang Por cultivated his barami. "Which barami was the most solid for you, Luang Por?" Luang Por explained, "Back then, I was also born during the dispensation of the Sikhi Buddha. I was the head of a band of wagon merchants, and I had many employees. White rice was our main product at that time, but we also offered other wares. I helped my workers arrange things to sell in other towns and purchase things from other towns to sell in our own town. At that time, it was the end of the rainy season, and the wagons weren't completely dry. As the leader of the merchants, I drove the first wagon and led the rest of the group. My wagon became bogged down in the mud. The oxen were unable to pull the wagon out of the mire, so I beat them with a birch cane in order to compel them to do so. The oxen pushed forward with every ounce of strength that they could muster, but they were still unable to free the wagon from the mud. Consumed with anger, I beat the oxen without even considering how they would feel. I whacked them with the cane unrelentingly until they both collapsed and cried out in pain. Then I pulled the oxen back onto their feet. I called some workers over to help push the wagon, and it was eventually unstuck from the mud. Afterward, I directed my workers to park the wagon somewhere. When I went to detach the oxen from the wagon, I noticed the tears streaming down and soaking both of their faces, and I was stricken with grief. I suddenly felt sorry for the oxen, so I led them to a place where they could drink water and eat grass. At that time, my eyes were fixed on their tears. The thought occurred to me, the oxen were dragging a heavy wagon, and the wagon got bogged down in the mud. The oxen didn't have enough energy to pull the wagon out from the mud. The oxen drank a bit of water and just stood there in tears without eating the grass. I thought, if I were an ox pulling a wagon this heavy, and the wagon got stuck in the mud, and the owner beat me this feverishly, how much pain and suffering would I feel? At that moment, I felt such deep loving kindness, metta, and sympathy for the oxen. I touched them and used my hand to rub their backs and told them, "From now on, I will not hit you or coerce you anymore. Take me to sell these wares first, and when we get back, I will not use the two of you for trading anymore." Then I proceeded to fetch some young grass for them to eat. I stroked their heads and bodies and showed them affection. I told them, "I'm sorry that I used the birch cane to hit the both of you so feverishly that it caused you both such pain." When we continued on our way, I sat on the wagon platform and continued to tell them, "Keep pulling the wagon, all right? From now on, I will not hit you anymore," and rubbed their backs with my hand. Whenever we parked the wagons, I would lead them to the water and find grass for them to eat. I noticed that the oxen spirits had been lifted. I spoke to them and smiled at them repeatedly. After we finished trading, we headed back to our town. While I was sitting on the wagon, I kept thinking to myself, "I am taking too much advantage of the oxen. They are pulling a wagon that is heavy, and I am making it heavier by sitting on it." As I was sitting atop the wagon, I thought about the oxen's situation, contemplating how the oxen are charged with pulling the wagon, and I shouldn't make them work too hard. If I were doing a task or carrying something, and the load was too heavy, I would also feel suffering. If someone else forced me to carry something heavy, I would feel even more suffering. Thus, I should not use these oxen for such heavy work anymore. From here on out, I will stop trading because I feel bad for the oxen. Once we reached our town, I sold everything and completely stopped trading. I was determined to go to the temple and cultivate wholesome deeds, kusala. At the temple, I listened to Dhamma from a fully enlightened arahant monk who spoke about loving kindness, metta, having sympathy toward fellow humans as well as sympathy toward animals, tirachana. He said, "We humans possess mindfulness and wisdom and know what is wrong and what is right. Do not use your power to exploit other people or animals. Train your mind to have love and sympathy for all people and for animals of all types and irrespective of type in this world." During that time, I had trained my mind to have metta. I also wanted to ordain, and I was able to do so according to that determination. After I was ordained, I developed continuous metta on a regular basis until I felt great love and sympathy for humans and animals. The temple in which I was ordained had no fewer than 500 monks and samaneras. Luang Por remarked, "The temple attendant, Aramikavata, who looked after the monks and samaneras during that era, was you, Venerable Thoon. It appears that we cultivated Bharami together in the era of the Sikhi Buddha." I proceeded to ask Luang Por, "With permission, Luang Por, do you recall if there were any monks or samaneras who were ordained alongside you during that era, who were reborn and were ordained alongside you in this era?" Luang Por responded, "There are, but some of them haven't ordained, while some have." "Who are the ones that have been ordained in this era, Luang Por?" Luang Por answered, "There is Luang Por Dun, Luang Por Chop, and Luang Por Lui, whose faces I can still remember. Other than that, I can't recall." Luang Por then asked me, "What about you? Is there anyone you remember that has been reborn in this era?" I told Luang Por, "There are two that I can remember clearly because their kutis were near my lodging. One is you, Luang Por, and the other is Luang Por Luang of Watsanfran Niwat, Got Kha District, Lampang Province. Luang Por Bua of Wat Pa Nong Sang. Luang Por Bunma, who lectured on Arise, Cease. Venerable Ācariya I and Venerable Ācariya Thoon also cultivated Bharami together during that era. I was the monk's attendant during that time, so I remember many of the teachers, Acariya." After recounting how we got started in our cultivation of Bharami, Luang Por posed the question, "In the era of our current Buddha, did you practice in the Buddha's dispensation while he was still alive?" "With permission, Luang Por, if you want me to recount the story, it's going to be long." Luang Por replied, "It doesn't matter if it's long, just tell it." I began by bringing up Luang Por Man in this lifetime. "In this life and in this rebirth, I have never seen Luang Por Man. When I was ordained as a samanera in 1949, Venerable Ācariya Som was going to take me to Luang Por Man's funeral. However, I had a prior learning commitment in Mahasarakham province, so I was unable to attend the funeral. I only knew of Luang Por Man's name from books and from his picture. I only came to know Luang Por Man in my meditative visions, nimitta, after I had ordained as a forest tradition Kammatthana monk. One night, I contemplated Dhamma in a manner that didn't result in comprehensive clarity. No matter how much I contemplated, I couldn't erase my doubts. I was still unsure of whether it was wrong or right. 2 nights had passed, yet I was still unable to interpret the Dhamma of that particular topic. There wasn't comprehensive clarity. So I left the Dhamma issue as it was and went back to focusing on a meditative mantra, parikama. Once my mind, citta, entered a serene state, Luang Por Thoon appeared and provided suggestions on how to fix the issue, and then he disappeared. My mind, citta, withdrew from the meditative state at that moment, and I used wisdom to contemplate the methods or metaphors, ubaya, that Luang Por Thoon had recommended. I developed comprehensive clarity in my understanding of that issue, and all related doubts immediately ceased. It was as if Luang Por Thoon had set upright what was overturned so that I could see the truth. Luang Por Thoon often appeared in my nimittas. He would appear when I was unable to reach a level of comprehensive clarity in my Dhamma contemplations of a particular issue. He would come and suggest a method or metaphor that would get me thinking and that fostered comprehensive clarity every single time. Since I started practicing, I have never asked any teacher for help in resolving issues or doubts. For the most part, I use wisdom to contemplate and solve Dhamma issues by myself. Only occasionally would Luang Por Thoon come and help me. From my first rains retreat, Vasa, to my 8th rains retreat, Vasa, Luang Por Thoon appeared to provide me with metaphors in my nimittas no fewer than 100 times. It made me wonder why Luang Por Thoon visited me in nimittas so often. Was I somehow associated with Luang Por Thoon in the past? What had been the nature of our relationship? Thus, I made a mental determination, adhithana. May I know what happened in the past rebirth in which I had a relationship with Luang Por Thoon. May this matter be known to me. Then I got into place and practiced contemplation, bhavana, and meditation as usual. That night, there appeared a large temple somewhere. It was cool and pleasant. There were around 500 monks living together, and each monk was very determined and earnest about practicing mental cultivation, bhavana patipati. Luang Por Thoon was the abbot who presided over the entire community of monks, sangha. I was the most senior monk after Luang Por Thoon. Back then, Luang Por Thoon's leadership style was decisive. Every monk in Samanera strictly adhered to the code of monastic discipline, Vinaya. If one of them violated the Vinaya, Luang Por Thoon would call him in and give him instruction. All of the monks in Samaneras greatly feared and also greatly revered Luang Por Thoon. There was no slacking or recklessness in any part of the daily routine. Walking meditation, cankama, and sitting meditation, samadhi, were practiced constantly. When Luang Por Thoon taught the Dhamma, he was incredibly resolute, intense, and serious. At that time, Luang Por Thoon had become afflicted with distortion of perception, sanya vipalasa. No monk could admonish him. I did not dare to admonish him either. He was a very stern person. I don't know where he erred in his practice. One morning, after he finished his meal, he sat there dully, not speaking to any other monks. I noticed his irregular behavior, but didn't dare ask him about it. Then he turned to the sangha and announced in a stern voice, "I am going to disrobe and leave this community." I pleaded with him in various ways, but he would not listen. After his announcement, he turned to face his seat, bowed 3 times, then rose to get a white robe to wear. He undressed and tossed his ochre robes aside. I pleaded with him, but was scolded. "Don't bother me." Once dressed in white, he walked out of the pavilion. I consulted the community of monks, sangha, about what we should do. The sangha nominated me to propose something and make a decision. I announced to the sangha, "No one is to leave this pavilion. Everyone is to sit here, send a mental stream of benevolence, metta, to our great teacher, Acariya, and contemplate bhavana and will, adhithana, his prompt return to us." I arranged for 3 monks and 3 laymen to trail him at a distance. Wherever he goes, you go. Don't let him see you or become aware that you are following him. Don't let him go anywhere on his own at all. Then the 3 monks and 3 laymen immediately set out to follow him. The sangha and I paid homage to the Buddha and chanted. We resolved, adhithana. We call upon the virtues of the Buddha, call upon the virtues of the Dhamma, call upon the virtues of the Arya Sangha, and call upon the perfections of character, Bharami, that we have cultivated to help inspire Venerable Ācariya Mun to promptly return to us today. Every monk had to do this. Thereafter, we focused our minds, citta, and contemplated, pavana, and made the asseveration of truth, satya atithana. If Venerable Ācariya does not return, we absolutely will not rise or leave this pavilion. Even if we must die, we are willing. Every single monk was determined in this resolution, atithana. At around 4 p.m., Luang Por Mun walked back into the temple on his own. Upon seeing him enter the temple grounds, the Sangha and I went to welcome him. We surrounded him and conducted him to the pavilion. We invited him to sit on the seat, asana, arranged for him, but he refused to sit there. The Sangha and I bowed in respect to him, but he forbade us from saluting, vantana, him, and forbade us from bowing to him. He suddenly said, "What am I? My wearing white like this means that I am no longer a monk, doesn't it?" I respectfully told him, "With permission, Acharya, that action does not sever your monkhood in any way. You merely had a momentary lapse, that's all." Then I declared to the Sangha, "May the Sangha acknowledge that at this moment, our Acharya's monkhood is still complete and whole. It has not been severed. If the Sangha feels that our Acariya is still a monk, then may we all rejoice, anumodhana, together." Thereafter, all of the monks rejoiced and said Sadhu in unison. Then I presented him with his monastic inner garment, Antara Vasaka, upper garment, Jivara, Uttara Sangha, and outer robe, Sankhati. After he was properly dressed, I invited him to sit on the prepared seat, asana. The Sangha and I bowed to him, and then sat in silence. Luang Por Mun gave an exhortation, ovata, to the Sangha. "From this moment forward, Venerable Thoon is hereby appointed to govern in my place. All of you must remain under Venerable Thoon's instructions, ovata, and governance. As for me, I wish to have freedom. If I didn't have Venerable Thoon as a student, I don't know what would become of me. From now on, let me live in an ordinary and private manner. May all of you remain under Venerable Thoon's instruction and governance. I will only preside as leader of the Sangha." I asked Luang Por Mun for a blessing. "With permission, Acharya, the Sangha and I request your blessing. May the Sangha and I be permitted to minister to you as part of our duty to our teacher, Acariya Vata, just as before and for all of time." He nodded. Thereafter, the Sangha continued to attend to him. From then on, Luang Por Mun never scolded any monk ever again. He isolated himself and practiced mental cultivation alone. When it was time to perform various duties or functions, vata, he carried them out just like any monk or samanera. When it was time to bathe, monks and samaneras would go and bathe him as usual. When it was time for the alms round, bintapata, he went out for alms just as every other monk and samanera. When it was time to eat, he ate with everyone in the pavilion. I carried out the duty of giving blessings. When it was time for patimokkha, I led the Sangha in chanting the exhortation of monastic discipline, ovata patimokkha. On holy days, ubosata, I was the one who admonished the monks and samaneras. In order for Luang Por Mun to feel comfortable and at leisure, I endeavored to perform my duties excellently. No conflicts that required the settlement of issues, atikarana, arose within the Sangha. I continued to govern the Sangha. Once in a while, Luang Por Mun would praise me in front of the other monks in the temple. Venerable Thoon has done a good job governing the Sangha because every monk strictly adheres to the monastic discipline. Governing was easy and there weren't any problems. This is the reason why Luang Por Mun exhibited such benevolence, metta, toward me and trusted me completely. Then in this lifetime, Luang Por Mun came to help me solve various problems and gave me methods of contemplation that resulted in comprehensive clarity. It wasn't Luang Por Mun himself that came. Rather, it was just the virtue of the sympathy he had for me that manifested in the visions, nimitta. After telling Luang Por Khao about the personal experiences that linked me to Luang Por Mun, I asked Luang Por Khao, "With permission, Luang Por, were you reborn during the Buddha's era while the Buddha was still alive? I respectfully invite you to tell me about what happened in the past." Luang Por smiled and immediately said, "During that time, I was a newly ordained Navaka monk. I had been ordained for only a few days and didn't yet know what was wrong or right according to monastic discipline, and didn't understand what the code of conduct was. However, I had good intentions for monkhood, was eager to practice, and desired to be free from suffering. Back then, there were around 500 monks who had also been newly ordained during that same period. Each monk wasn't quite familiar with the discipline. A monk who ordained before us invited us to form a community. He said, 'There is a teacher, Acariya, who practices well. He is strict in the discipline and in his code of conduct, is very orderly, and is a fully enlightened arahant monk. He is thoroughly wise, clever, and sharp. His path of practice leads directly to the path and fruit of enlightenment, Magga Phala Nibbana. His methods of practice enable practitioners to reach the path and fruit of enlightenment more quickly.' I believed it because I already wanted to practice in order to reach enlightenment. That teacher monk spoke to many of the new monks about these same claims. Every monk believed them. There were ever more ready to become that teacher's students. All of the new monks were prepared to follow him. When the time came, we all set out together. When the roughly 500 newly ordained monks arrived at their destination, there was an elder, Thera monk, already awaiting them. Then the teacher monk who led us there directed all of the new monks to go and bow to the elder monk and await his instruction, Ovata. The elder monk gave an exhortation. "Sangha, you must all follow the same code of conduct. There are altogether 5 rules. This is the direct path and the quickest method of disciplining the mind in order to eradicate all of the defilements and mental intoxications within it. 1. Do not eat meat of any kind. 2. Live entirely in the forest. 3. Wear only robes made of rags from dust heaps, bangsakula. 4. Live entirely off of food from alms begging, bindabata. And 5. Only dwell at the foot of a tree. Every monk must strictly abide by these 5 rules." The head instructor who established these rules and presided over the Sangha was named Venerable Devadatta. The monk next in command was named Venerable Ācariya, and there were many other monks down the line. Thereafter, all of the monks practiced according to the 5 rules in a serious manner. A short while later, I saw Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Moggallana come to this monastery and act friendly with Venerable Devadatta. One night, Venerable Devadatta allowed Venerable Sariputta to give a Dhamma lecture to the new monks. At that time, I greatly admired and had deep faith in Venerable Sariputta's Dhamma. He taught the Dhamma in such a beautiful way and with reason that could undoubtedly be believed. This led to a change of heart. I would definitely ask to follow Venerable Sariputta. At that time, Venerable Devadatta was one of great pride, titi, and conceit, mana. He refused to listen to Venerable Sariputta's Dhamma sermon at all. All he did was lie there uninterested and fall asleep. Venerable Ācariya also fell asleep. It could have been due to the magical powers, iti, of Venerable Moggallana, or the magical powers, iti, of the Buddha, that Venerable Devadatta and Venerable Ācariya fell asleep. When it was nearly light, Venerable Sariputta said, "New monks, whoever wishes to go with me, I will take you to pay homage, vandana, to the Buddha right now." All of the new monks immediately got ready. Once everyone was ready, all of the new monks set out with Venerable Moggallana and Venerable Sariputta. Back then, I really liked Venerable Sariputta's Dhamma and pledged myself as a student of his from that moment forward. I did not achieve any path and fruit of enlightenment, Magga Phala Nibbana, back in those days though. I did, however, greatly admire and feel strong devotion, sattha, for the Dhamma and for being ordained. I was determined in my practice and was willing to sacrifice my life in devotion to the Buddhist religion until the day I died. I asked Luang Por, "In this present lifetime, when you practice mental cultivation, did Venerable Sariputta come and teach you the Dhamma?" Luang Por replied, "It's just the same as you. You have never seen Luang Por Man in this lifetime, yet why does he appear to teach you the Dhamma? It's because you have been linked to him in past lives. It is the same for me. I have also had visions, nimitta, in which Venerable Sariputta comes and teaches me." Luang Por stated that Venerable Sariputta frequently appeared to teach in the Dhamma. You may wonder how this could be possible, or whether Ācariya Thoon has made all of this up. For assurances, you could go ask Venerable Ācariya Bunpeng Khema Piratto of Wat Tham Kong Pen. Luang Por Khao has intimated this to monks and samaneras on many occasions. However, I asked Luang Por directly. That's why he explained it in such detail.